Good morning, Chair. We are ready for our first witness.
I, Emma Sorrell, do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Could you first state your full name for the record, please?
Yes, it's Emma Louise Sorrell.
Thank you. Emma, you are the daughter of Frederick James Peck, who died on the 4th of December 2004 when he was 54 years old.
That's right.
At the time of his death, your father, who we're going to refer to as Fred, I understand, was an inpatient at the Lakes unit in Colchester.
Correct.
You have with you today your husband Dave, sitting with you for support.
Yes.
And I understand that you have in front of you a copy of your witness statement that was sent in response to this inquiry's Rule 9 request.
Correct.
Emma, your statement is 69 pages long, and if you turn just very briefly to the final page, we can see that it's dated the 6th of June of this year.
Correct.
And that you have signed and given a statement of truth.
Correct.
Have you had a chance to look through your statement recently?
Yes, I have.
And are you happy that its contents are true and accurate?
Yes.
Thank you. Emma, as has been explained to you, that witness statement therefore stands as your evidence.
Yes.
And for that reason, I don't intend to take you through it line by line in your oral evidence. We'll go through it together. And I want to start by talking a little bit about the background to the development of your father's mental ill health. As we go through, so that you can follow, but you don't need to, I'll talk you through what page numbers and paragraph numbers I'm up to.
Thank you.
Emma, I understand that you first noticed that your father was low in mood in around December 2003.
Correct.
And then in about March 2004, you had your first indication that he might in fact be suffering from depression.
That's right.
I think this was around about the time of your own 27th birthday.
That's right. It was mid-March. He came round and pointed out that his hair was falling out again. He'd suffered from alopecia prior to my birth.
Yes.
In 1977. It had grown back a little bit, and his mental health had improved greatly over that period of time. He hadn't suffered from depression prior to that. And his hair was falling out again, and that caused him a lot of trauma.
Yes. I understand that at that time, that was the first time your father had ever cried in front of you.
That's correct.
And it's your belief that the alopecia triggered in some way a spiral of depressive or very negative thoughts?
Yes, it was absolutely the trigger, as far as I'm concerned.
I understand that it took him back to a time when he had split from your mother.
Yes, in 1989-90, yes.
And my understanding from what you've told us and from your witness statement is that, to put it mildly, that was not an amicable divorce.
Correct. It caused him a lot of trauma at the time.
After that incident in your garden in mid-March 2004, you, and I understand from your witness statement, you were very close with your father.
Yes.
So you talk frequently on the phone.
Correct.
You were in contact with him very regularly, and he put on a brave face in those months.
Very much so. He tried to muddle through the best way he could, but I could see that his mental health was beginning to spiral.
Yes.
It was just a general low mood to begin with.
Yes.
It wasn't until May, the end of May 2004, that he recognised that his mental health was really not very good at that point.
Yes.
And that he may have been suffering from depression.
Yes.
And it was the 28th of May that he actually admitted himself privately to the Priory Hospital in Chelmsford.
Yes.
Where he stayed for a week. But due to financial constraints, because obviously it's very expensive,
yes.
private mental health care, he discharged himself on the 4th of June.
So he was there between the 28th of May and the 4th of June, and then came home.
Yes.
And I understand that in the period then, because we know that your father was sectioned on the 20th of July, so between him coming out of the Priory on the 4th of June 2004 and his admission to the Lakes on the 20th of July, you saw quite a marked deterioration in his mental health.
It was rapid, and I think this is something I really want to stress, the importance of mental health and people recognising how rapidly things can progress,
Yes.
and that mental health can decline at such a fast rate, because between the 4th of June and the 20th of July, when I had him sectioned, he became a completely different person.
Yes.
I wasn't aware of psychotic depression or anything back in those days, though that terminology wasn't familiar to us back in those days. But he was very much talking about, he was reliving the trauma of the divorce in 1989-90.
Yes.
But he was speaking in terms of everything was in the present. So he was going to lose his house, he was going to lose his business, that his world was basically falling apart.
Yes,
and
I understand.
I could see that his grip on reality had been lost at some point during those months of progression of his mental health decline.
I understand. You make reference to him pacing up and down relentlessly, being unable to sleep, talking about running out of time, chain
Correct.
smoking.
Yes.
Very agitated throughout.
Yeah, he continued to go to work for quite a period of months during this time.
Yes.
I cannot remember exactly when he stopped going to work, because he was a business owner. So obviously he needed to work to keep the business going.
Yes.
But at some point he stopped going to work, and by the 15th of July, he had got to the stage where he'd given up completely. He'd stopped eating.
Yes.
He'd stopped drinking.
I understand that
he'd
by that.
stopped-
I'm so sorry. No, you go ahead.
He'd stopped sleeping.
Yes.
And the repeated pacing and talking about running out of time,
Yes.
and expressing wishes to end his own life,
Yes.
was a 24/7 occurrence.
I think
So
that-
between the
No, go ahead.
between the 15th and 20th of July, his partner and I found ourselves on 24/7 suicide watch,
Yes.
which
By
was
that
obviously
stage-
very concerning.
Of course. And you've expressed in your witness statement how traumatic that time obviously was, this period where you and his partner were effectively on suicide watch 24 hours a day. You had police remove his guns from him, you
That's
removed sharp objects from the home, and effectively his response in expressing how strongly, or in expressing strongly his own wish to die, was to stop eating and to stop sleeping and so on.
Yes, that's correct, Rachel. So we had what I called social workers back then in the day,
Yes.
which I now probably, I understand where the social care or where the crisis team came and assessed him during
Yes.
that final week of his rapid decline. And it was when he stopped drinking, that's when it became a real concern, because he started to go yellow, obviously, because he was suffering from jaundice, because he wasn't drinking enough.
Yes.
So that was at the point where his physical health was
Being very severely affected.
Absolutely.
And I think it was at that point, is this right, that one of those either crisis team members or social workers expressed to you and to his partner that he needed to go immediately to hospital?
That's right, on the 20th of July.
Yes.
They came to the house, they assessed him, and that was at the point where they said he needs to go to the Lakes Hospital in Colchester. I cannot recall, because obviously it was a very traumatic event in my life. I cannot actually recall how he got there, whether I drove him there or whether they drove him there. I know that if I didn't drive him there, I followed.
Yes.
And at that point, we were not aware of what was actually the process was going, what it was involved with the process.
Yes.
Once we arrived at the Lakes Hospital, this is all an unfamiliar landscape to us, obviously.
Yes.
And he was assessed there and then.
Yes.
And it was decided that he needed to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act.
I understand.
At that point. And it shows how unprepared we were. We didn't even take an overnight bag. We were not aware at that point that sectioning was on the cards.
I understand. It was all completely alien to you.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And I think you also say, in what is likely related to the trauma of the period that had preceded it and that day, that you have something of a mental block about the events of the 20th of July.
Absolutely. Although it's strange because once we got to the hospital, I can accurately remember everything.
Yes.
But I think because we'd been on 24/7 suicide watch for 5 days, we were exhausted.
Of course.
We were traumatised.
Yes.
The period of getting him to the hospital is the part that I cannot remember.
That's all right.
But once he's at the hospital, I can remember very vividly.
Yes.
Because due to personal circumstances, I had to request that he was immediately transferred to the Peterborough unit in Clacton.
So he wasn't, in fact, so the assessment took place.
Yeah.
A decision was made that the situation, the crisis was severe enough that your father needed to be detained under the Mental Health Act. And there was then an immediate transfer from the Lakes to Peterborough at Clacton.
Correct,
Yes.
yes.
One of the other things I wanted to ask you about, and we'll come back to this, is about any diagnosis that your father received. I'm looking now, Emma, at page 6 of your witness statement, and it's at paragraph 7.
Mm-hmm.
I think the answer is, in terms of any definitive diagnosis, you were not aware of one until the time of your father's inquest. Does that sum it up?
Absolutely, it absolutely does, Rachel. The only mention of any form of diagnosis was a breakdown of some kind.
Yes.
It was just breakdown or mental breakdown. There wasn't a proper diagnosis. I didn't receive any official diagnosis throughout the 5 months,
Yes.
5 month period
Yes.
of time that he was detained. It wasn't until the inquest that, and the verdict was read.
Yes.
And that was at the point where they said he killed himself while suffering from psychotic depression. That was the first time that I'd heard the phrase or the terminology psychotic depression,
Yes.
at which I had to go home and research because I hadn't been aware of the term up until that point.
Yes.
But
Yes,
it does
I
make
understand.
sense because of his psychosis, because of what I've said previously.
Yes, and what you've described about what almost appear in your description of them to have been delusional beliefs at the time, and something that had triggered him to be believing things that were not objectively true, and so on.
That's right.
I think one of the other things you say, and we're going to come on to this, but that you had very limited engagement from staff at both the Lakes and less so at Peterborough during the time that your father was an inpatient, but that the only real reference to any diagnosis you ever heard was in fairly informal conversation with staff talking about a breakdown. And I think one member of staff in particular in around October 2004 saying to you that it was one of the most severe breakdowns they had ever seen.
Correct. So when he was in Peterborough,
Yes.
in the initial, I would say, first month, I had a good relationship with one of the nurses, which was his nurse that was basically observing him most of the time.
Yes.
And the nurse in charge of him.
Yes.
They were great at actually talking to me and telling me what was going on as much as they could.
This was at Peterborough.
At Peterborough.
Yes.
And during that first month, the prognosis was good.
Yes.
You know, they said it within the first week, well, he won't be here very long.
Yes.
You know, this isn't. I wouldn't worry yourself too much.
Yes.
He's in a safe place, but we're going to get him better. And you know, it's just a little breakdown. It's just a breakdown.
Yes.
It wasn't until October, like as you've mentioned, that someone actually said to me that they hadn't seen such a severe breakdown for such a long time.
I understand. I think it might be helpful to set matters in context, and so that all that happened is understood. I'm going to take you through the timeline. If you look, please, Emma, at page 10, and it's actually a section entitled Admission. But just to take you through the dates, and you must tell me if I have any of this wrong. As we've heard, the assessment took place at the Lakes on the 20th of July, and there was then an immediate transfer to Peterborough.
Correct.
Your father was discharged from Peterborough on the 18th of September 2004.
Correct.
He was readmitted 2 days later on the 20th of September 2004, having
Correct.
made a number of threats to take his own life.
Correct.
He remained on Peterborough then until another discharge on the 17th of October 2004.
Correct.
And then on the 22nd of October 2004, whilst at home, he made a serious attempt to end his life and was taken to Colchester General for treatment.
That's correct. He nearly died.
Yes.
He had to be cut down, and a neighbour had to resuscitate him while
Yes.
they waited for the ambulance.
Yes.
Yes, so that's correct.
From Colchester General,
Yes.
he was then admitted to the Lakes on the 24th of October 2004.
Correct.
And there he remained.
Correct. And I was not informed or asked whether the Lakes was the best place for him. He was just transferred there.
Yes.
And obviously, because of the personal circumstances during the sectioning, when I viewed my concerns with regard to Dad being in the Lakes Hospital,
Yes.
I found it quite odd that he was then admitted to the Lakes Hospital following this incident and was not transferred back to Peterborough, where I knew that he had been relatively as happy as he, or more comfortable.
Comfortable, yes. Yes, we'll come on to that, because you go on to give us a very clear description of what is a stark contrast between those two units, the Lakes and Peterborough.
Yeah.
You were not involved in the decision to admit him to the Lakes, or not consulted about it.
No.
And in fact, taking it in the round, I think it's right to say that you were not involved at any stage or in almost any aspect of decisions about your father's care and treatment, save for one meeting on the 29th of November 2004.
That is correct, Rachel. Yeah.
Well, that only came about because you took very proactive action and wrote a detailed letter to his treating doctor, is that right?
Absolutely, that is correct. I had tried contacting his psychiatrist on a number of occasions. I had repeatedly requested to be involved in any meetings to discuss anything, discharges, transfers, anything. I was deemed important enough to sign the papers to have him sectioned.
Yes.
It felt to me that following the sectioning, I was brushed under the carpet.
I understand.
And it wasn't until October, I was so desperate, Rachel, at this point, that I wrote an email and a letter. Within the letter, I was explaining what I believed his feelings were,
Yes.
because we had a very close relationship.
Yes.
And I did this because a man of a certain age and era, and he was very poorly, I thought that perhaps he wasn't opening up as he should.
Yes.
And I thought that I could perhaps shed any light, anything could help, any information could help at this point. And he'd been repeating certain key sentences over and over again, so I included
You set those out? Yes.
I included all of the key triggers, the things that I thought may have caused his depression.
Yes.
I'm not a psychiatrist, but I was desperate. And that was at the point where I was trying to get them to actually involve me at all.
Yes. And
Was that a letter of complaint, or was it a letter that actually just pointed out what you wanted to say about him, or was it a bit of both?
It was a letter just explaining clarity, trying to help, I think, Chair, more than anything. But the email was also trying to put it in the most formal way that I thought I could.
Yes.
That I needed to be involved, and I wanted to be involved.
Yes.
Because I'd been ignored up until that point, and we were 4 months in at this point.
Yes.
And he wasn't getting any better, and that was my concern.
I understand. It's right, I think, that you received no response to that letter.
I didn't. No.
And that your overall feeling thereafter, because communications did not improve, you were not, after that letter, asked for your input.
No. Apart from, sorry, Rachel.
No, go ahead.
Just to clarify, but I was invited to the meeting on
To
the
that
29th.
meeting, yes.
And that's the result of it.
Yes.
Was that I was actually involved in that meeting, but that was the one meeting that I was involved with.
Yes.
Because sadly he passed away not long after
A number of days
that.
later. Yes, I understand. So you did attend that meeting,
Yeah.
but there was no response. And my very strong sense, Emma, is that you were desperately trying to provide input and background and give his treating clinicians a sense of who this man was, what might be troubling him, and how they could help him.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Anything that I could do to help, because, as I say, he was not improving at all.
Yes.
And I could see that, especially once he was in the Lakes Hospital, he withdrew further into himself.
Yes.
And that's to say that not only was he not communicating with the staff, so I was suspecting that he wasn't communicating with his psychiatrist.
Yes.
But he was also withdrawing within himself with regards to even speaking to visitors.
Yes.
It was like he'd given up.
Yes.
And he was just biding his time until he
Yes.
got the next opportunity.
And so, in a way, this was your effort to be his voice, because by that point he was unable.
Absolutely.
I understand.
Yeah.
What you say in your witness statement is that the fact that there came no response, and other than your attendance at that one meeting, no improvement in communication, left you feeling belittled.
I felt very belittled, and I felt that I didn't matter.
Yes.
I felt that I was insignificant. It's actually damaged me to this day, to be honest, because the treatment from start to finish,
Yes.
it was like I wasn't important enough, I wasn't significant enough, and I believe I stated within the substantive evidence that I still believe I was questioning whether I was significant enough to complete this Rule 9 request, because that was the way that it left me.
I understand.
It left me feeling like I was nothing.
Yes. I'm so sorry.
No, that's...
Let's go to... no, in fact, just to, if we can, just to going back to the sort of timeline of what occurred. You attended that meeting on the 29th of November, and at that stage a possible discharge before Christmas was discussed.
Correct. It was decided during that meeting that he was not ready to be discharged.
Yes.
His psychiatrist was in agreement with me that he was still presenting in the same way that he had during the meeting prior to his discharge in October.
Yes.
And that subsequently he had nearly succeeded in taking his own life. So the decision was that he was not going to be discharged, and that a follow-up meeting would be held on the 6th of December.
Yes.
But unfortunately Dad didn't make it to the 6th.
Indeed. I think if we turn, please, to, if you and I turn, to page 14 of your witness statement and to paragraph 18. One of the things you've been asked about there is what the effect on your father was of being admitted under section. And one of the things that you have noted throughout your witness statement is that taking ourselves back in time, in 2004, it was simply not the case that mental health and mental health difficulties were discussed in quite the open way that they are now.
Oh, absolutely. We've come a long way, and
Yes.
I'm glad that we've come a long way in acknowledging mental health. Do you mind if I read? May I read? Just
Go
a
ahead.
little?
You wanted to read a particular section, I think, at the top of page 15.
Yes, thank you. He had worked hard for over 30 years to build himself a respectable reputation. He was a proud, independent and dignified man. So to strip him of his freedom and for him to be sectioned and grouped together with mentally unstable people of varying degrees and illnesses was devastating for him. For a man of a certain age and era, if he was sectioned, he believed that there was no going back into society, and that facing people after something like that, even if he did get better, and this was something, one of the key phrases that he repeated while he was under section, that is it all over the press? Is everyone talking about me?
Yes.
How can I face people again? Can I?
Go ahead. Please go on.
I think that we all felt overwhelmed and like it had all happened very suddenly. I understood the severity of the situation, but my dad was not in the right frame of mind at that time to make such decisions. We were not aware that he was going to be sectioned until the moment that it happened. We were not at all prepared. Dad was assessed during that meeting at the Lakes Hospital, and they made the decision. I agreed, of course, because they were the professionals and I was exhausted, traumatised and desperate.
Yes.
Having to watch his daughter sign the papers to have him sectioned was, I'm sure, a very demoralising and distressing experience for him. He had prided himself on being a strong, stable, dependable man to all. He was used to having control of his life and being the support figure for so many family members and friends.
Thank you. Emma, one of the other things you know is that apart from the process being completely alien to you, the whole environment was completely alien to him. He was a man who liked to be at home, and suddenly he was in this strange environment, surrounded by people with varying degrees of mental illness.
Yes, absolutely, Rachel. He was a man who had a close-knit group of friends and family. He was a homebody. He hardly ever went out.
Yes.
He hardly ever went on holiday.
Do you think if he hadn't been sectioned, he would have been prepared to be in hospital on a voluntary basis? Do you think he would have?
I think he would have rather that.
And
I think he'd have been able to retain his dignity, I think, in his mind.
And he did know he was very unwell because he put himself in the Priory, hadn't he?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he wanted to get better. I think that's something worth noting.
Yeah.
And that will be, because when we come on to it, it was made apparent that they'd kind of given up on him, but he hadn't given up on him at that point.
Yes.
And neither had I.
Of course. I understand that, save obviously for the periods where your father was discharged, it is the case that between the date of his section on the 20th of July 2004 and the date of his death on the 4th of December 2004, you visited him, if not every day, close to.
As much as I could, yes. I visited him every day for weeks.
Yes.
Probably about 6 weeks. But I was working full-time at that time.
Yes.
Long hours, 12, 13 hours. I was having to then drive from where I worked to pick up his partner, to
Yes.
take his partner to the hospital.
Yes.
We'd spend 3 or 4 hours there, then I would take her home, then I'd have to go home. I'd
Yes.
get about 3, 4 hours sleep.
And do it all again.
And do it all again.
Yes.
Yeah. So by that stage, I had to reduce my visitations to 3 to 4 times a week
Yes.
for my own health, because I'd
protect
lost
yourself.
so much weight as well, and I was exhausted.
Yes. We know that your father had these two distinct periods as an inpatient, first at Peterborough and then at the Lakes. And Emma, if we can talk now a little about the ward environment and the contrast that I've referred to already, if you can go to page 18 of your witness statement, please.
Yeah.
and to question 24, where you were asked about your impressions of any ward that your father was on as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
What you tell us there, and I think this sums up the stark contrast,
Yeah.
you describe Peter Brough, which is at Clacton, as more of a warm, calming, nurturing environment, both physically and therapeutically. And you describe the Lakes as feeling more like a prison than a hospital, and that patients appeared to be treated like inmates.
Absolutely. I didn't like leaving him there. I didn't like spending time there, and I really didn't like leaving him there. And that, I think, is why he withdrew into himself.
Yes.
Because the entire environment was sparse.
Yes.
There was nothing to do. I think they did have a few activities, but perhaps most of them were not applicable to someone of his age.
I think you mentioned manicures and pedicures
Indeed.
or cookery, just unsuitable.
Yeah, absolutely. And so all there was to do was watch the television.
Yes.
And I cannot recall one incident where he went out into the garden during the 5-week stay at the Lakes either. And he was an outside kind of person.
Yes.
And so he spent a lot more time in his room. So the times when I would arrive, I cannot remember many times, I can't actually remember one time when he was actually out in the social area. They had to go and get him from his bedroom.
Yes. This is what you describe about him beginning to withdraw into himself at the Lakes.
Yes.
In contrast, you describe Peter Brough as a more warm environment with things to do in the social area, a kitchen for him to make refreshments.
Yeah.
You describe him forming good relationships with the nurse who was observing him most of the time.
Yeah.
And just being more social, as well as being able to be outside.
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, he wasn't happy to be there.
No.
But he was still engaging.
Yes.
He was still engaging with people, and he would actually have a laugh with his nurse.
Yes.
You know, they had a very close bond.
Yes.
And there were more. They were small things.
Yes.
They didn't have to be big things. He loved doing puzzles all of a sudden.
Yes.
At least it kept his mind occupied, and it was something that he could do with other people.
Yes.
There was a tennis table
Yes.
there, and like you said, the garden, and he could make himself a cup of tea.
Yes.
It was all those little creature comforts and things to keep his mind occupied, which I think helped him.
Yes.
Which were missing from the Lakes Hospital. I think there was a tennis table, but that was in a separate room, small room, and it just didn't work.
Yes.
It really, the whole environment didn't work.
I understand. The other thing you tell us in the same vein is that staff at Peter Brough were very much more engaged with you.
Oh, absolutely.
And talked to you about how he was getting on, set expectations,
yes,
and helped you to understand and have an insight into the care and treatment that he was receiving.
Absolutely. It wasn't so much the care and treatment, because obviously I was naive to all of that, Rachel. This is all new to me since the beginning of the Lampard Inquiry. But at the time, at least they could tell me how his day had been.
Yes.
How he was feeling, with how he was presenting within himself. That was really helpful and comforting for me to know that they were at least doing that and keeping an eye on him.
Yes.
I cannot recall one member of staff ever speaking to me at the Lakes Hospital, and I didn't feel that I could approach them either, and
No.
I didn't actually know any of them.
Yes.
And one thing I have noted, I have actually found the courage to start reading some notes from the hospital that I found. They didn't actually, it's not actually mentioned that I visited for pages in. Now, I haven't read the whole lot because it's too emotional for me to read, but we're talking about days, and I haven't visited, and I know I visited. So either they didn't note down that I visited,
Yes.
or they actually didn't know that I was his daughter,
Yes.
because that was how impersonal the whole environment was.
But either way, it's not good. You also tell us that, in contrast to Peter Brough, there was such a diverse range of patients at the Lakes and such little interaction or sort of visibility of staff that in fact the environment was particularly difficult for your father, who was a quiet man, who liked to be at home, who, as you've described him, was a man of a certain age. He was being approached by other patients and asked intrusive and difficult questions. And the picture that you paint in your description, you must tell me if this is fair, is of some chaos.
Oh, absolutely. The diverse range of illnesses was extraordinary.
Yes.
And it was the invasive way, because the staff were not around and were not supporting and not interacting with either my father or any of the other patients. The patients, some of them, that they didn't have that sense of personal space, and I understand that they had their own issues, but for Dad and for myself, we're not used to that.
No.
It was very intimidating, in fact.
Yes.
That was probably why he spent a lot of time in his room.
Yes. Thank you. Talking about staff, and Emma, I'm looking now, forgive me, I'm looking now at...
20.
Thank you. Thank you. Page 20. One of the things you say is that there never seemed to be many staff present on the ward at the Lakes.
No.
And you go on, and we'll come on to this, but you were asked about the inquest, and you've dealt with that later in your statement. And one of the things you learned at the inquest was that ward at the Lakes was severely understaffed at the time of your father's death.
It was, yes.
You describe that, looking now at page 21, as a matter that was one of outrage to you.
It was, would you mind if I read it?
Please go
I think
ahead.
it's just because I've put it so...
You've put it so well.
Concisely.
Yes.
I was absolutely outraged when I discovered the reasons for the multiple failings was due to a lack of staff. If this was the case and they could not provide the adequate care that my dad and the other patients on the ward required, we should have been informed. We were in no way informed that he was not receiving the required care that he so desperately needed. Had I known, although I should not have had to, I would have paid for him to receive private care once again. If the hospital could not provide the care needed, why were they allowed to continue functioning at all? If it was a hospital managing physical ailments, would there not have been protocols in place to ensure that patients were cared for adequately? If someone were to die because their drip or ventilation system was not managed due to staff shortages, would there not be utter outrage? Why should mental health patients be treated with any less respect and responsibility? To whom did the responsibility lie, and why was this not escalated and managed? I am still furious about this. It wasn't just the observations that were compromised due to understaffing. He didn't receive any psychiatric care. How on earth was he supposed to improve if he didn't receive any treatment? An analogy would be me arriving at A&E with my arm hanging off and the nurses stemming the bleeding but leaving the arm hanging to rot for 5 months. Did you want me to continue?
You're very welcome to.
Yeah.
You go on to say that effectively he was imprisoned, in your view, in an inhospitable environment.
Correct.
Where there were not sufficient staff to take care of him.
Absolutely.
You say in that last paragraph that the culmination of that hostile environment, the lack of therapeutic care and psychiatric treatment, massively contributed towards the rapid deterioration of your father's mental health and, in your view, resulted in his ultimate demise.
Absolutely. because he gave up, because they gave up, or that's the way he perceived it, because no one was doing anything to help him or get him better.
Yes.
He was just stuck there, left there to rot, and that was what he expressed to me, Rachel, repeatedly. I've
That
just
he
been
had-
left here to rot.
Thank you.
Sorry, I shout when I get a bit angry.
There's nothing to apologise for. Shout away. I'm turning now, Emma, to talk a little with you about the treatment your father did receive, and I'm looking at page 24, paragraph 38. You've explained in very clear terms how little communication there was with you at all, never mind about the details of your father's care and treatment. And we'll come on to this, but you later discovered that there were no therapeutic services available at all on the ward.
Yeah,
And
that's
again,
right.
to be clear, we're talking about the Lakes, so the second part of your father's inpatient stay. You are aware, though, that he received ECT.
That's right. Yes, he received the maximum number of treatments, and it was in October that he had received the maximum number of ECT treatments, and that he needed a 4-week break.
Yes.
But it was during this time that I noticed that he was actually getting worse, not
Yes.
better. And that I expressed my concerns to one of the nurses or one of the members of staff that he was actually getting worse.
Yes.
And they said that that was a side effect of the treatment. And I presume that it was a side effect that was temporary and that hopefully it would have got him better, but it didn't. But
I think, as well as being told that it was a side effect, you were effectively told when you raised that concern that he appeared to be getting worse, that was a normal reaction to the maximum amount of ECT treatment.
yeah, absolutely.
The other thing you tell us is that, bearing in mind all that you've told us thus far about your father and his background and his sense of pride and his integrity, those ECT treatments left him feeling particularly bereft.
They did, absolutely, Rachel. It was incredibly distressing. He'd hit rock bottom already,
Yes.
but the ECT treatment, I don't know if I should go into the details of what happened when he received the ECT treatment.
You are absolutely welcome to do that.
But he would soil himself, he'd wet himself.
Yes.
And that was incredibly distressing to my
Yes.
father.
Yes,
He was very proud.
of course. He was such a polite man.
Oh, he was incredibly polite, and he would not have complained.
But about that
he did complain about that.
Yes. I think that was the only thing,
That
wasn't
was
it?
the only thing he complained about.
Yes. You discovered, and I think if I summarise, in fact, it is the case that it's your understanding that your father received no psychological or therapeutic care at all from the date of his sectioning on the 20th of July to the date of his death on the 4th of December.
That is my understanding from the admissions during the inquest from the witnesses.
Yes. That obviously was something that you were incredibly shocked to learn.
Oh, it was, yes, absolutely.
But in particular, and we will come back to this, it was something of a shock to you to see in the executive summary of the serious untoward incident report that has been provided to you, a comment to the effect that he declined psychological treatment or refused to engage with it.
Absolutely. I think we come onto it in detail further
Yes.
on, Rachel. But yes, you're absolutely right. It was said that he had declined psychological treatment. He was poorly, and he was a man of a certain age and era. I hate to repeat it, but it was difficult for men are only just starting to learn how to talk about their mental illness and to talk about their mental welfare.
Yes.
That would have been very difficult for him to open up in the first place.
Yes.
But that's their job, surely, to find a way.
To facilitate
to engage,
that.
to facilitate, to find a way to get him to engage.
Yes.
However minimally. That's the job.
Yes. You also learned at the inquest into your father's death that quite apart from having received no psychological care, his psychiatrist giving evidence stated that that could have assisted him.
Yes, she actually said that had resources been available to provide psychological care, that could have helped him.
Yes.
But because of a lack of resources, it was not offered.
Yes.
So how on earth was he supposed to be getting better if they couldn't even provide psychological care in a mental health hospital?
Yes. Could I ask you then, Emma, if you look at the bottom of page 26 and the paragraph, the last paragraph there, I think that's one that you wanted to read.
May I?
Yes.
Thank you. I am utterly disgusted that during a 5-month period of admission, my dad did not receive any psychological care. If a patient is admitted to a physical ward with an illness, they would be assessed, diagnosed, and they would receive the appropriate treatment. I recognise the complexity surrounding the diagnosis of mental illness, but this is also true of physical illness. In a physical health environment, treatment and results would have been regularly assessed and adapted until a diagnosis and possible treatment plan could be agreed. My perception was that his psychiatrist did not understand why he had depreciated so rapidly under her care, as she did not seem to know how to treat him. It is now obvious to me he hadn't received any care. The situation and environment just exacerbated his illness.
Thank you. You went on to learn from the executive summary to the SUI report that I've just referred to, and I'm quoting from it, this is in the middle of page 27 of your witness statement. The panel acknowledged that there is no clinical psychologist or psychotherapist based at the inpatient unit or allocated to the ward.
Correct. I think we covered that a little bit later as well.
Yes. I want to go on, please, Emma, if you can turn to page 31, to talk a little about the observations your father was under, particularly in the latter half of his time as an inpatient, so from late October onwards.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I do not have all of the details of all of the reductions and increases on his observations, but this is over 20 years ago,
course.
and I didn't expect to find myself in this situation in the first place. So,
Of course.
But the ones that I have recorded are
Of course,
here.
and we'll run through those. You know, I hope that there's nothing to apologise for. You tell us, and I will run you through it, that when your father was first admitted to the Lakes in October 2004, he was placed under 24-hour observation.
Correct.
By the 29th of November, and the meeting that we've discussed that you were able to attend because of your letter, this had been reduced to 15-minute observations.
Correct.
Despite it being noted at that meeting that day, on the 29th, that he wasn't much improved.
Correct.
When your father died on the ward on the 4th of December, he was still subject to 15-minute observations.
Correct.
Although, and we'll come back to this, there is no evidence that those observations every 15 minutes were in fact being carried out.
There wasn't.
From the records you have seen and the evidence you heard at inquest, staff admitted that they did not always have time to carry out those observations.
Correct.
On the 4th of December 2004, when it was noticed that your father was missing, that was only because he hadn't attended to take his morning medication.
That's right.
It was well outside of a 15-minute time frame.
Absolutely. I think I summarised the findings during the inquest of the inconsistent statements received by the key witnesses.
Yes.
From the Lakes Hospital.
Yes.
So and by the PCs attending the scene.
Yes.
And the coroner's officer. So the statement provided by a PC who attended the scene, him and his colleague were informed that he was determined dead at 10 hours
Yes.
by a doctor. The coroner's officer stated during the inquest that he was confirmed dead at 9:15.
Yes.
But a nurse stated during the inquest that she had let him into the bathroom at 9:15, and that approximately 9:30 he had not responded to a knock on the door.
Yes.
Another witness stated at the inquest that they noticed that he was missing when he did not turn up for his morning medications, as
Yes.
you said, Rachel. But then the final verdict was that at about 9:30 a.m. he was found hanging in the bathroom.
Yes.
So you can see my problem with the inconsistencies
Of
between
course.
the statements.
And in fact, so you heard all this conflicting and contradictory evidence at inquest, and I think one of the things you tell us, and we will come to it, is that in many ways you came away from that inquest with more questions than you had going into it.
Indeed, I did, and I unfortunately believe I will never get answers to those questions.
Yes. One of the things, just looking briefly, please, at the bottom of page 33 of your witness statement, one of the things that we know is that your father died by ligature using his shoelaces.
Correct.
And one of the questions, understandably, that you ask is why he had those in his possession in the first place.
Absolutely. And they said a PC had mentioned, a member of staff had informed a PC, one of the PCs that attended the scene, that belts and shoelaces were only removed on a seclusion due to their human rights.
Yes.
Now, I found this very difficult to understand because my dad was not on seclusion. So, yes, I can understand why his shoelaces were not removed.
Yes.
But they had removed his, if I can remember from memory, his dressing gown belt,
Yes.
his trouser belt, and his mobile phone lead.
Yes.
So, where do is it selective human rights that we're adhering to here,
Yes.
or it didn't make sense to me, Rachel?
And doesn't now, presumably. No. I understand. Thank you. There were also, apart from the contradictory evidence you heard at inquest about timing and when it was that it was noticed that your father was missing and what was happening with the observations, there was also a great deal of contradictory evidence about whether or not the bathroom in which your father died was locked and how it was opened.
Yes, that's absolutely right. One of the witnesses said that they had to find the nurse in charge of observations in order to unlock the door.
Yes.
But then I found during one of the statements during the inquest, sorry, I've lost my place now.
That's all right. If you look at page 33, I think.
33.
Yes. And towards the bottom of that page.
That's, yeah. It was stated the keys had to be found.
Yes.
I'm just getting my bearings.
No, that's all right. I
Sorry.
think if I can help.
And they had actually stated that all staff carried keys.
Yes.
Well, if all staff carried keys, why did
Someone else have
someone
to be
else
found?
have to be found? And then I believe during one of the PC witness statements that they had mentioned that there was a locking system that whereby they could unlock it without the key from the outside.
Yes.
So they're contradictory statements once again.
Yes. And again, for you, left struggling to understand what happened to your father, raising more questions than these statements answered.
And no closure, may I add.
I'm so sorry, no closure.
No closure.
I'd like to talk briefly about periods of leave from the ward. I know that there is more to say about the decisions to discharge him and your feelings about those being demonstrably wrong. If you look, please, Emma, at page 36 and at paragraph 66, as I understand it, when your father was away from the ward on leave, generally that was with you.
Yes, that's right.
You were given no information whatsoever about how to support him.
No, I wasn't. I was informed by his partner that he had he'd been given leave.
Yes.
And that I was to collect him at a certain time and bring him back at a certain time, and that was all of the information that I received.
Yes.
I had no idea of the risk factors, although I knew that he hadn't got any better.
Yes.
But by this stage, it seemed that the opinion of the psychiatrist was that, well, he's not getting any better in hospital, so let's chuck him out there for a few hours and see how he gets on.
Let's see what happens.
And hope for the best.
Yes, I see.
I'm not aware of any risk assessments. I'm not aware of... I was not informed of what to look out for, or obviously I knew the obvious things, but, you know, how to manage him while he was out.
Yes, what risks to look out for.
Indeed, all the process or protocols of getting him back, because sometimes it was incredibly difficult to actually get him back in the car, to take him back, because obviously his reticence to actually
Be there. Yes.
And sometimes he would actually kick the car out of gear while I was driving him back to the hospital.
Yes.
And he'd be repeatedly begging me not to take him back.
Yes.
So I had no idea of what the protocols would have been had I not been able to actually succeed in getting him back to the hospital. Thankfully I did.
Yes.
On each occasion.
And you describe, unsurprisingly, those periods of having your father away from the ward on leave as terrifying for you for those reasons.
Oh, absolutely, Rachel. I couldn't rest. I couldn't relax while he was out. I was absolutely terrified
Yes.
from start to finish.
Yes.
And he came to our home quite a few times.
Yes.
And he was so drugged up on medication that he could hardly function at all.
Yes.
So my fear was, I just couldn't keep him, I couldn't let him out of my sight for 5 minutes.
Yes.
During those periods. They were terrifying, quite frankly.
Thank you. In the same way, talking about those periods when your father was discharged, both from Peterborough, in fact, on the 18th of September and again on the 17th of October. And if you want to follow it, I'm looking now at page 39. You were not involved in any decisions to discharge him.
No.
On both of those occasions, I think it's your evidence that had you been, you would have strongly advised against it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. He hadn't got any better.
Yes.
In fact, he was just getting worse.
And as you say, that wasn't simply your view. There was a general acknowledgement that he had not improved. But as far as it seemed to you, the attitude was, well, let's give it a go and let's see what happens.
Absolutely. It was the same attitude, Rachel, as the leaves.
Yes.
The discharges were, well, he's not getting any better. Let's just keep our fingers crossed and hope that this helps and this goes well.
Yes. On neither of those occasions following discharge, as far as you are aware, was there any plan for follow-up or any kind of care or treatment in the community?
No, that's correct. I wasn't actually aware of any of these things until, obviously, this inquiry. No.
You have found reference in your own emails, certainly to the period just prior to your father's discharge on the 18th of September, that at that very time he was continually expressing a wish to die.
He was. Yes, he was.
And to you, I think, it therefore was plainly, at best, a questionable decision to discharge him.
That's putting it very politely.
Too mildly.
Very kindly.
You put it in your words, please.
I think it was disgusting, disgraceful,
Yes.
and quite frankly, irresponsible and unprofessional.
Thank you.
And it put him at risk.
Yes.
And obviously it did put him at risk because he nearly succeeded the first time.
Yes.
Had he actually succeeded, which he nearly did, I wonder what the accountability would have been, and I guess it would have been nothing,
I understand.
as it was on the 4th of December.
Thank you. We've talked about how little engagement there was from treating clinicians, ward staff and trust staff. You have described in very vivid terms the effect that's had on you. I think this is right, isn't it, that at the time and throughout your father's inpatient stays at both of these units, you would have done anything to be able to input into his care and to engage with staff?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're getting an impression of the kind of person that I am by now. My only concern was for my dad's mental health care. It was for my dad's safety and for him to get better.
Yes.
And any way that I could have helped, I would have done.
Yes.
And my opinion is that it was an easier option to ignore me because I was asking difficult questions that they couldn't answer because they were understaffed and were not providing the care.
Yes.
So
And
avoidance was the easy option.
I understand, because you were potentially presenting challenges and asking questions.
Yes, indeed.
Any requests you made, other than the one we've discussed, which led to you attending the meeting on the 29th of November, any requests you made to speak to his psychiatrists were ignored?
Ignored, absolutely. And actually a meeting did occur, I think we come on to it, but a meeting did occur following the 29th.
Yes.
And I was not invited to that one.
Thank you.
And that's when Dad petitioned to have his section lifted.
Yes, that was on the 3rd of December.
It was.
He appealed against his section.
That's right.
Did you even know that that meeting was taking place?
I didn't find out until the inquest.
Indeed.
And that's when I found out that he had actually been granted 8 hours leave on the 4th of December rather than the 3 that my sister and I believed he was on.
So
had we known that, we would have picked him up first thing that morning.
I understand. So to make that clear for those listening, you had understood that you had understood before the 4th of December that he had been granted just 3 hours leave.
Correct.
Unbeknownst to you on the 3rd, despite the fact that his condition had not improved and that appears to have been widely known and acknowledged, a decision was taken that in fact that period of leave would be extended to 8 hours.
Correct.
Neither you nor your sister were informed of that fact.
No.
And therefore didn't arrive to pick him up, and that is in fact the date on which your father died.
Indeed. And it questions why we were not informed, as we were the ones that were taking care of him that day.
Of course. Thank you.
If you had been invited to that meeting, what would you have said?
8 hours is too long, quite frankly, at that point, Chair. He wasn't presenting well enough. I think 3 hours was safe. That was still risky enough. 8 hours would have been too much.
Thank you. Emma, if you're content, what I'd like to do is to take a short break now, perhaps of about 10 or 15 minutes, and as long as the chair is content, and then we'll come back to this.
10 minutes.
Thank you.
10 minutes.
Chair, thank you. Thank you. Emma, I'd like to move on to some of the events after your father's death. And the first thing I want to note is that you tell us in your witness statement that as far as you are aware, at no time during any stage of his treatment were you informed how to raise a concern or a complaint of any kind?
No. And by this stage, I didn't think that I was valuable enough to actually do that anyway, because I'd been so blatantly ignored.
Yes. In the same vein, after your father's death, you received no information about the processes that might take place or investigations that might be carried out?
No, that's correct. The only information that I received was when I employed a solicitor, and my solicitor informed me and tried to reassure me that there would be a police investigation.
Yes.
And there would be an investigation by the coroner.
Yes.
And that my questions would be answered during the inquest.
At that stage?
Yes.
In terms of the trust, no support was offered?
No.
There was no
Absolutely
communication
none.
whatsoever?
No, absolutely none. I didn't hear anything following my dad's passing from the trust. The only time that I ever saw them or heard from them again was during the inquest.
Yes. You understand now that the circumstances of your father's death were included in the Health and Safety Executive's prosecution of the trust.
Yes.
In 2020 and 2021. When is the first time you came to learn that that was the case?
When you informed me of it, Rachel, in April this year.
From this inquiry?
Indeed, that was the first. It was a big shock to me, to be honest.
Yes.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. I was aware that there had been an internal investigation.
Yes.
Because during the preparation for the inquest, after what I should add was many months, over a year, of requesting information from the trust in preparation for the inquest.
Yes.
An hour before the inquest was due to start, I was provided with the SUI executive summary, which is 3 pages, which is all. So I'd like to point out that this evidence today, as it stands right now, is only based upon
that document,
and the emails and information that I had retained over the years, the correspondence between myself and my solicitor and barrister.
Let's turn to that executive summary, Emma. If you can look, please, at page 49 of your witness statement.
Mm-hmm.
There are a number of parts of that it's crucial that you highlight, or that you feel very important to highlight. If we go to the first bullet point there are 2 statements you find in that executive summary. The first, I don't know whether you want to read it or you'd like me to do that.
May I read them both?
Of course, read them both.
Thank you, Rachel. So this is within the SUI summary report, because this is the only information that I received. It stated in one point, Mr. Frederick Peck demonstrated a sustained level of risk of suicide throughout his involvement with the Trust's services. Another point within the SUI Executive Summary Report states, at the time of the incident, the clinical team was sufficiently optimistic about Mr. Peck's progress that they granted him up to 8 hours accompanied leave with family members. The panel felt this to be technically appropriate.
Yes.
To me, the 2 statements are utterly contradictory.
And that is because, you must tell me if I'm wrong, the level of risk remained unchanged.
Indeed.
Progress did not appear to have been made.
Indeed.
And yet, in the second point that you've read to us, progress was apparently deemed sufficient for him to have that longer period of leave that we were discussing before the break.
Indeed. And we have to bear in mind that this is the SUI Executive Summary Report, so this is in retrospect.
Yes.
So the first statement was obviously what they believed to be the case at the point where my father took his own life.
Yes.
And the second statement was because they're both retrospective.
Yes. If we go on, please, to the next section that starts, the panel concludes. This is the second really key statement from within that executive summary that you wanted to highlight, and that reads as follows. The panel concludes that no omission or action contributed to the incident. The incident, to be clear, being your father's death.
Yes, that's correct. So the two statements below this within my substantive evidence completely contradict this statement. The first point was that the panel acknowledged that there is no clinical psychologist or psychotherapist based at the inpatient unit or allocated to the ward. It remains an open question whether easy access to psychological treatments on the ward would have helped Mr. Peck to enter into a trustful therapeutic relationship that might have enabled him to address his difficulties in relationships and his traumatic past experiences.
Yes.
That's surely an omission.
Yes.
Would you not agree? It's also worth stating that nowhere within the SUI report does it state that there was a staffing issue,
No.
that the ward was understaffed.
Yes.
And that is, in my humble opinion, one of the contributing factors,
Yes.
contributing factors to what actually happened on the 4th of December.
Yes. At the second bullet point, at the very end of page 49, if you want to go on to that. Have I lost you? I'm so sorry. So this
No,
is
that's
the
fine.
final
I'm just
bullet point
sorry,
on page
Rachel.
49.
I'm just checking that I've covered everything. No, that's absolutely fine.
Take your time.
No, that's fine. Thank you. So the second point was, as the nursing observation policy was used in the Lakes at the time the panel had some concern regarding the task-oriented nature of carrying out periodic checks.
Yes.
It is clear that Mr. Peck used the 15-minute period of time between checks to take his life. Nowhere within this statement does it refer to the whiteboard system or the lack of staffing. Sorry
Yes.
to keep repeating myself, but
No,
I think
go
it bears
ahead.
repeating.
Yes.
One
of the other... Go on.
Sorry.
No, please
yeah.
go ahead.
In the witness statement by one of the PCs who attended the scene following
Yes.
my dad's death, he stated, I've redacted the names, on returning to Gosfield Ward, I spoke to a member of staff. He informed me that there are procedures in place regarding 15-minute checks. The responsibility of these checks is changed on an hourly basis. This rota is on a whiteboard system in the staff room. The member of staff stated that there is legislation in force that requires them to record these checks. However, he went on to state that this is not being done and never has been. This is the way things are, not only here, but at the other NHS trusts in the area, and I thought that was worth mentioning.
Yes.
And that is taken from one of the PC statements during the inquest.
Thank
Yeah.
you. The other, obviously very important point that is dealt with to a greater or lesser extent in the executive summary that you have seen of the SUI report is the issue of the ligature point.
Yes, this is the next big issue.
Yes.
So within the statement, do you mind if I read
I don't mind
it?
at all.
It is clear that the ligature point was identified by the risk management audit. The staff were not aware of the risks posed by the exposed pipe and bracket, as they were not aware that it had not been appropriately secured during the remedial work. It is of concern that the work concluded leaving this pipe exposed. It may have caused staff to develop a false sense of security and making assumptions that all ligature points had been dealt with. I'd like to remind you again of this statement. The panel concludes that no omission or action contributed to the incident. I find that very difficult to accept,
Yes.
considering the statements and the fact that there was the prosecution that
Indeed.
followed the HSE prosecution.
Indeed. And Emma, if we look across at page 51 and paragraph 102, and to the first bullet point there under A.
May I read that, Rachel, please?
Please do.
A ligature point audit was carried out on the ward. The ligature point was identified and an action plan was developed. Unfortunately, this ligature point was not removed as part of the remedial work until after the incident.
Yes.
Unfortunately, my dad hung himself.
Thank you.
You
take your time.
The use of the word unfortunately is such a flippant remark. It is utterly disrespectful of the person that died. He may have been just one man to the world, but he was the world to me. This statement is quite frankly an absolute insult to my dad and the value of his life. The language is utterly inappropriate in this setting. We are not talking about an error in a risk assessment in a corporate setting.
No.
We are talking about an error in a risk assessment that determines life or death.
Thank you. Staying with this very difficult subject of the ligature point, the other thing that you have picked up from the executive summary of the SUI, looking back to page 50 and to the middle of the page there, it is the following statement. It is the opinion of the panel that it is impossible to mitigate all ligature points. However, given the determined desire by Mr. Peck to take his own life, it is impossible to conclude if he would not have chosen to take his life outside of hospital or by some other method. It is important to note he had made a serious suicide attempt on the 22nd of October 2004 while on leave. And Emma, I know that you have comments on that particular statement.
I do. Quite frankly, insulting again. This point really highlights the culture and attitude that I was faced with at this time, that he would have probably done it anyway, and that I was making an unnecessary fuss over something that would have inevitably happened. I did not accept this then, and I do not accept this conclusion now. It is also a fine example of the trust brushing over the fact that they allowed someone that they considered a high-risk patient to enter a bathroom containing a ligature point that had been identified as a risk, when the high-risk patient had attempted to hang himself 5 weeks prior to this incident. It was stated that a considered approach to risk was evident in the SUI report. This does not correlate with the previous statements or the facts and the final outcome.
Thank you. I want to go on, please, to your experience of the inquest into your father's death. And we will go through some of the key matters about that. Is it right for me to say that that process, you describe it as harrowing from start to finish?
It was as traumatising as when he was in hospital, quite frankly, Rachel.
Yes. Emma, if you want to follow, I'm looking at the top of page 53. And to summarise the key points, the inquest did not take place until a year and a half later, so May 2006.
Correct.
As you've told us already, disclosure of key documents from the trust to your legal representatives did not take place until an hour before the inquest was due to begin, and even then was not complete.
Indeed.
The main witnesses, and certainly those that you considered to be the key witnesses, were not called to give evidence at inquest.
Correct.
The staff member who was responsible on the 4th of December 2004 for conducting the 15-minute observations on your father did not attend because that staff member was on holiday.
Correct.
The trust was reticent to agree to the attendance of key witnesses.
We had to fight for it, my barrister and I. We were at the point of adjournment,
Yes.
and it was only because I stood my ground
Yes.
that it was agreed that the inquest would carry over 2 days
Yes.
rather than one. Because I'd waited 18 months already. They'd had 18 months to prepare witnesses.
Yes. And we've been through some of this conflicting evidence. What was immediately apparent to you and sticks with you is that the statements and the evidence from those witnesses was conflicting and contradictory.
Absolutely.
The inquest was an incredibly painful process for you and for your family as a whole.
It was.
You felt that you were ignored and, in summary, treated appallingly.
Absolutely. I think that summarises it very well.
Can I ask, would the rest of your family agree with that too? They weren't in any way treated differently. So you have a sister.
I have a sister.
And
yes.
he had a partner.
He had a partner, yes.
Yeah.
They were in agreement. Well, his partner and I, we do not speak anymore, but
Right.
my sister is in agreement. Yeah.
Thank you.
One of the things that you've told us is that that process at inquest, which you had been assured would provide you with the answers that to you were and remain now so pressing, that the entire process has caused you anguish, or caused you anguish at the time and continues to do so.
I didn't get any closure.
Yes.
And I was made to feel once again that I didn't matter. The reticence to actually disclose any documents, and the fact that even when they did disclose the documents, they were incomplete.
Yes.
Because they apparently contained controversial information that may be damaging to myself and my sister. I still do not know what that controversial material is, but whatever that controversial material was, I could have coped with that a lot better than not knowing, because it leaves it open. The wound will never close.
Yes.
I will not get any closure because I do not have full visibility.
Yes. In terms of the conclusions at inquest, you've told us that what you understand to have been concluded is that in relation to the ligature point we've discussed, and Emma, I'm looking at paragraph 108 on page 57, it was established that a risk assessment had been carried out in June 2004, identifying that ligature point as high risk. That during the evidence, a representative of the Lakes admitted that that risk had not been identified in earlier assessments,
Correct.
that it hadn't been rectified and that no check had been carried out that it had been rectified,
Correct.
and crucially that the potential risk it posed had not been highlighted to staff actually working on the ground.
That's correct.
Your family, in your view, received nothing more than what you consider to have been a forced apology,
Indeed.
that the trust would learn from its mistakes
Indeed.
and make improvements to ensure that no such thing happened again.
Mm-hmm.
You consider those promises, I'm so sorry, to have been entirely false.
I do. And to clarify that, sadly, there were 3 more inpatient deaths and 1 near miss. And this is just at the Lakes Hospital, and this is just through ligature points.
Yes,
So it's 1 hospital, 1 cause of death,
yes,
3 more deaths and 1 near miss
yes.
following my dad's passing. I think that's proof in itself
Thank you.
that changes have not been made and improvements, they have not learned their lessons.
Thank you. I'd like to move, if you are content, to the thoughts you have had and the matters you have set out when asked by this inquiry what you think should have been done differently in your father's case. You've set that out comprehensively if you turn to page 61, and it's paragraph 114.
Sorry, Rachel,
No,
may
go
I just going back to the inquest?
Yes.
Because I was so desperate for answers, I employed a barrister.
Go ahead. Yes.
And the barrister represented us on the day and asked questions that we needed answers to.
Yes.
I noted the very impatient manner in which he was treated during the inquest by both the coroner and the trust. They were trying to make him feel the same way that they had me, that I was making an unnecessary fuss.
I see.
Following the inquest, my barrister provided me with notes of hearing. Would you mind if I read a little summary of what he put? Just because it backs up what I believed, how I had been treated, but he, as a barrister, had stated that he found his own finding of the entire process was unjust. That they didn't provide the necessary documentation. They failed to call the important witnesses. He highlighted that the coroner was highly inclined to defend the institution, and that this was reflected in the way in which she managed the pre-hearing in terms of lack of transparency of evidence, which left us terribly unprepared,
Yes.
whereas the trust was in a position to prepare thoroughly. The impatient manner in which she treated him during questioning, and her attitude toward the verdict and the questionable selection of evidence highlighted during her summary statement. He had to inform the coroner in the strongest terms possible that she could not wash her hands of the evidence. So I thought that was important to highlight, because this is the coroner as
Yes.
well, that now I am being treated exactly the same way.
Yes. And presumably in terms of what you have told us about the overall effect of the inquest process on you, those matters that you've just talked through were significantly contributed to the impression you've been left with.
Absolutely. And I think that's a large part of why I haven't really resolved or come to terms with it.
I understand. Thank you.
It's prolonged the grief, Rachel,
Yes.
for 20 years.
Thank you. Emma, do you feel able at this stage to turn to the matters at paragraph 114 and the things that you think should have been done differently?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. Let's go through those.
I would like to state at this moment I haven't had an opportunity to read all of the core bundles or go through it in detail as yet.
Yes.
I've been too busy doing this.
I
So
understand.
I might add to it if
course.
that's okay.
And you're welcome to do so.
Thank you.
Emma, the first point you make is that your father resorted to private mental health care in the first instance. What do you want to say about that, please?
I am aware that he had contacted his doctor.
Yes.
I'm not aware of us being made aware that there were any outpatient services available.
Yes.
It would seem quite strange in this day and age that I didn't question this, but obviously it was an unfamiliar landscape for me. We're just trying to find our way through it. But had I have known that outpatient care was available, and I'm sure my father would have chosen that instead of paying privately, because he was a financially astute
Yes.
man.
And for the same reason, you go on to your second point is about education for families regarding the care options that are available,
Indeed.
and about that care itself, you go on to recommend more support and outpatient care to avoid sectioning in the first place.
Yes, if at all possible.
Do you think that was realistic in your father's case, though, where he deteriorated so very quickly?
Possibly not. It's difficult to say in retrospect, isn't it? But there were, if we go back to the period of time, so it was mid-March to July, that's quite a few months where he may have been able to receive outpatient care, which may have helped in, or at least avoided the rapid decline in his mental health as it did uncared for, untreated.
Yes. You go on looking at the next bullet point, and I think, in fact, many of these are related to the theme that we've discussed throughout your evidence. This is about more and better communication, both with the patient and with that patient's family.
Absolutely, because the patient, quite more often than not in these circumstances, is not in a position to help themselves or to communicate how they're feeling.
Yes.
And I also believe that communicating with the family is vital, because we know how they present when they're well.
Yes.
Someone in the hospital who's seeing them poorly wouldn't have any concept of how they present when they're well.
Yes.
So how can they compare it? How can they actually measure how poorly they are?
Indeed, and that's part of the reason, as I understand it, that you made repeated and what became increasingly desperate attempts to be allowed to input into your father's care, or at least to be able to give that sort of background so that there could be an understanding of the man that he was when he was well.
Absolutely. It chimes back to when they said that he had declined therapeutic care.
Yes.
And that he hadn't engaged. Had they known my father, they would have understood that he would have been sitting, listening and taking it all in. But he was not a man to draw attention to himself.
Yes.
He wouldn't be here doing this, for example. He was a quiet man that kept to himself in those terms. So they would have understood that even if he wasn't engaging
Yes.
and being the centre of attention, he would have been listening, Rachel, and he would have been taking it all on board.
I understand. You go on, for reasons that I think are obvious given the details of what happened, to recommend an improvement in risk management and overall processes, as well as accurate recording of data.
Absolutely. I was an IT and programme manager.
Yes.
And we did risk, part of my daily tasks was risk management.
Yes.
And it was a very important part of my job. And we're talking about money.
Yes.
We're not talking about people's lives.
Indeed. Linking back to the communication point, you go on to say that one of the things that should have been done differently is more empathy towards both patients and family members.
Indeed, absolutely.
And then going back to what you've told us and what you learned about staff shortages, you say that neither therapeutic treatment nor psychiatric care nor observations should be compromised due to staff shortages.
If they cannot provide those key fundamental parts of the care, they shouldn't be allowed to function, quite frankly. It's setting a false sense of security.
Yes. Inquests, you say, should be held in a timely fashion.
Yes, that
And
was very painful that
Yeah.
that took 18 months.
Of course. And linking back to what we've just discussed, that family members should be supported during the process. You go on to talk about transparency and that family members should be entitled to honest and transparent information regarding any failures,
Yes,
not only to allow grieving and closure, but to ensure that lessons are learned in a wider sense.
indeed. It shouldn't be a blame culture that we're trying to produce here.
Yes.
The key is to acknowledge the failures and to start working towards improving things so that these failures do not continue to happen.
Yes.
And it's very evident to me that to date, over the 20 years, that has not happened.
Yes.
And during the core bundle, within the core bundle of the April hearings, Paul Scott referred to my father's case, and I assume that he took the statements from the SUI executive summary, which we've been through in detail.
Yes.
Now, if little old me could see the contradictions within those statements, then surely Paul Scott should have been able to recognise the inconsistencies.
Yes. You point out that there shouldn't be a blame culture, which helps no one, but that covering up failings, quite apart from preventing the learning of lessons, only increases the distress of a grieving family.
It's incredibly insulting. It
Yes.
undermines the value of the person that has lost their life and the love of the families.
Linked to what we've said about the ward environment, you say that ward environments need to be welcoming and nurturing, and that there needs to be a solid foundation of communication regarding all plans for leave or transfer or discharges.
Indeed.
You consider that family members must be supported and consulted and at the very least informed of support and care plans.
Yes. We form an integral part of the entire process, do we not?
Yes. You think that the outcome of investigations should be disclosed to family members, and in part that would assist in the grieving process.
Absolutely.
You consider, and you've told us that you have this background in risk, that regular assessments should be carried out to ensure that any findings from investigations are addressed to avoid further harm to other patients.
Yes.
You consider that the hospital should make a proper apology.
Yes.
That families should be informed of their rights from the start and know what to do and who to go to and who to raise concerns with.
Absolutely.
You also tell us that you consider that staff need to be better supported to avoid a lack of empathy from emotional burnout.
Yes, that's right.
Can we turn please to page 64? You've looked very carefully through this inquiry's terms of reference and list of issues, and there are a number of points you make there. One of those is that if you look at the last bullet point on page 64, the internal investigation, and as we've discussed, you've seen the SUI executive summary, appeared to you to be biased, defensive, and not at all to expose the truth of what happened to your father.
Absolutely. I mean, it omitted key facts that arose during the inquest.
Yes.
For instance. So that's why I suggested that internal investigations are not sufficient in such cases, and that external investigations from an independent body should be carried out in parallel.
Yes. The other point that I know is crucial to you, and you have mentioned this and you've read some sections of your witness statement about it, you feel incredibly strongly that there ought to be parity between the treatment of physical health issues and mental health issues.
Yes, that's very important, Rachel. That's probably the key point for me.
Yes.
Out of all of this is that none of these failings would have been allowed to occur for 20 plus years, and for the deaths to occur as they have done in a physical healthcare setting.
Yes.
And I think that the term parity of esteem between the two healthcare systems really encompasses everything that we're trying to cover here, because if we have parity of esteem between the two healthcare systems, this wouldn't happen.
Yes. Thank you. Emma, I think if you take a moment, please, just to consider if there's anything else that you want to cover before I ask you, as we've discussed, to read, please, the very last section of your witness statement that starts at the top of page 68. Are you happy to do that?
I am. There was one thing I just wanted
Please
to
do.
say. Sorry. I understand as a call participant that I will never receive the answers to the questions that I have regarding my dad's case, because this does not fall within the remit of this inquiry. Our only hope is that we can bring about long-lasting and meaningful change to mental health care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to read, I understand that you would, from the top
Please.
of page 68 to the end, and Emma, once we've done that, we'll go on to your commemorative evidence about your father.
Okay. Thank you. At the time of writing this, according to the NHS England website, 1 in 4 adults and 1 in 10 children experience mental illness. Considering the current political, economic and technological complexities that every individual in the country is facing, cases of mental health issues are inevitably increasing. Mental health issues are not going to miraculously go away. They are only going to increase in number and severity. It is evident that very little has changed or been addressed in the 20+ years since my dad's passing. Society has moved along a little bit. We now have mental health awareness days and weeks, and we discuss mental health a little more openly than we did. We still have a long way to go, however, before we accept that mental illness is the same as any physical illness. Sadly, there is still a social stigma associated with mental illness all of these years later. While society catches up, the NHS needs to ensure that its mental health care system is at the very least to the same standard of practices, processes and procedures as the physical health care system, and that a patient and their families can expect the same quality of care, treatment, transparency and compassion. In order for this to happen, we, the public, need to have assurances that the government is no longer going to stick its head in the sand and pretend that this is not happening. It's managed very well at blindsiding and ignoring the catalogue of reports and concerns presented to them to date. If real change is going to occur, it must come from the top down. We need to see a sincere commitment from the government to ensure that it is invested both financially and practically. Without this, I fear that any recommendations made by the inquiry will fall on deaf ears, as they have for the past 20+ years. Lessons will not be learned. More mental health inpatients will die, and we will be back in this situation in another 20 years. It is blatantly apparent that at present there is an enormous disparity between physical health services and mental health services. It is clear to me as a layman that this is both a cultural and systemic issue that needs to be addressed. And I understand that the cultural aspect does not fall within the remit of this inquiry. To ensure that this inquiry has not been a massive waste of time, money, work and trauma to the families involved, it must be ensured that recommended changes are acknowledged and acted upon. How can we be reassured that changes have been maintained months, years and decades following this inquiry? How can we ensure that the evidence to prove that this is the case is complete, transparent and accurate. I cannot speak for anyone else, but I do not at present have any faith that this can be achieved without the support and commitment of the government to ensure that organisations such as the Trust cannot continue to manipulate and withhold information to protect its reputation as it has done for decades.
Thank you. Emma, as long as you're ready, would you like to read the commemorative account you've prepared about your father? And after that, we'll see the photographs in the slideshow that you've provided.
Lovely. Hello everyone, my name is Emma and this is my husband David. I am here today to represent my late father, Frederick James Peck. Born 22nd of September 1950, died 4th of December 2004 at the age of 54. David is now older than my father was when he died, and I am not too far behind him. I hope that we are lucky enough to spend many more years together with our beautiful children. Sadly, my father was not afforded that opportunity. I will not be recounting my father's entire history. That was done at his funeral. What I will do today is attempt to give you an idea of the kind of man that he was, so that you may appreciate to some small extent the depth of our devastation when he died. So, who was Fred Peck? It's strange. But this is the part of this entire process that I am struggling with the most. Talking about Dad as he was when he was alive. Coming from a poor background as he did, my dad somehow managed to accomplish what most would not have. He owned his own business along with his business partner, Tony. Through grit, determination, long hours, high standards and great customer service, they thrived for over 30 years. They ran a well-respected business and it was earned through honest, hard graft. I can remember on many occasions my dad being unhappy with a car's bodywork and spending the entire day redoing it until it was perfect, knowing full well that he would not charge for the extra hours and materials, just because one minuscule thing was not quite right. That was Dad, honest, hardworking and proud. I would spend a lot of time at the garage so that I could spend time around him. I'd watch the customers and friends that popped in just to have a chat. He had a magnetic personality that just drew people to him. He wasn't loud, quite the opposite in fact. He was a good listener. He had a way with people that made them feel at ease, comforted. They could be themselves around him. It was his personality that brought the business alive and made it thrive as it did. So as you have probably already guessed, my dad was an old school, hard-working, proud kind of guy that enjoyed the basic things in life. He didn't go out very often, preferring to spend his time at home with friends and family, with good food and a bottle of wine or two. There was a continuous flow of people visiting because they were struggling in one way or another, and they knew that Fred would be there to provide a shoulder to cry on, a sympathetic ear and solid advice. There was no discrimination or judgment when Fred was around. When I was a child, Dad worked long hours and was busy maintaining the house and garden. It didn't stop him from finding the time to spend with me though. We would go for long bike rides and play lots of sports. As a teenager, I absolutely loved doing anything that involved helping Dad and being outside. I loved creosoting the stables, gardening, painting sheds, and looking after all of the animals. I think that this is why I'm still at my happiest when I'm outside, enjoying a long walk or working hard in the garden. He kept himself really fit and loved playing squash, badminton and golf. Because Dad and I had played badminton on a weekly basis for years, when I was at university, I thought that it would be lovely for him to teach me how to play squash, the sport that he loved so much. I thought I had my youth and fitness on my side. How hard could it be? I waltzed in there thinking I looked pretty cool in my newly purchased sportswear. Well, within seconds, Dad had me running from front to back, left to right, like a bee in a bottle. I didn't even see the first few bullets that he served. What kind of holy hell sport was this? With a massive grin on his face, he was bouncing from side to side, swishing his racket around and looking like a pro. After 10 minutes of utter torture, I was hot, sweaty, and I was feeling muscles that I didn't even know existed. I wanted to wipe the sweatless, cool and collected smug look right off his face, which obviously made him laugh even harder. He didn't make things easier for me just because I was a beginner. He taught me well, but he always pushed me to be better. I'm so grateful to him for that. Most people remember Fred Peck from the garage that he and Tony Sharp owned, T&F Motors. It was not just somewhere that people could go to get their cars fixed. It became a refuge for so many people and a social hub. People knew that they could go there, sit in the kitchen, have a cuppa, have a cake and talk about anything and everything. Most Sundays, my now husband and I would meet Dad at the driving range. Dad would not only practice his technique, he would take the time to teach and guide us. One memory that I have is of the three of us going to play our first 18-hole course together. Well, on the first tee, my now husband, who had not played many times before, teed off perfectly. My dad's, on the other hand, did not tee off perfectly. And oh my goodness, was he cross. Dad hardly ever got cross. He threw his golf club across the fairway and stopped off like a petulant child. I can still remember the sight of his little bum strutting off into the distance as we stood there not knowing whether to laugh or chase after him. If Dad did anything, he did it well. And nothing was good enough unless he'd done it perfectly. In his late 40s, he decided to study GCSE law. I've never seen him so animated and enthusiastic. He loved learning and he loved the English language. He was always curious about new words and new concepts. I was so proud of him. He read every one of my essays and my dissertation for my first degree. He was hungry to learn. My favourite memories with Dad are of us gardening together and talking about plants. We would spend hours walking and discussing the plants that we were growing in our gardens, how we were caring for them, what we had newly learned, and considering our plans for what we were going to do next. Walking the dogs was another of my favourite memories. We'd walk for hours and just talk, or sometimes just enjoy the silence as we soaked up the stunning nature that surrounded us. All of the while watching as our Springer Spaniels swished their tails excitedly and ran in spirals around us. He also taught himself to play the guitar because he absolutely loved all kinds of music. He'd get so frustrated when he couldn't get a chord right because of his fat, short fingers, as he would say. He stuck at it, though, and he got pretty good. One of the only items that I managed to rescue from the family home was his guitars. I have given his electric guitars to my son, who has taught himself how to play fantastically on his grandfather's Fender. I have given our daughter his acoustic guitar, and she is keen to follow suit. I wish that Dad could be here to hear our son play. I know that he would have loved learning and playing with him. He'd be so proud of him. He used to love listening to me playing the piano. He did a very good job of pretending that he enjoyed listening to me playing the clarinet. As we got older, Dad would visit me every week, and I would get to visit him at every opportunity, at work or at home. For that I have no regrets. I knew how much I loved him, and I never took him for granted. We would talk about anything and everything, from art, literature, law, culture, travel and politics. We'd set the world to rights over a few glasses of wine. We'd never talk about people. That was one of the things I respected the most about Dad. He didn't judge or gossip. That's a rare quality these days. Dad's love of everyone and everything around him was contagious. He'd tell a funny story about something that had happened that day, and we would all end up chuckling as he attempted to get his words out through his tears of laughter. It was the observational love of life and people that made Dad laugh. I will never forget the glint in his eyes while he recited Billy Connolly's story. His smile would fill his gorgeous face. I struggled to get his breath. His white smile would shine so bright that you couldn't help but smile and laugh with him. His sense of humour was awesome. He was the most kind, genuine, gentle human being that I've ever had the honour of knowing. He was inoffensive to a fault. Dad first showed signs of depression in mid-March 2004, and his mental health rapidly declined over the next few months, to the point where his partner and I found ourselves on 24-hour suicide watch. Worried sick about my dad, utterly exhausted, at my wits' end, and in desperate need of professional help, I finally signed the papers to have Dad sectioned under the Mental Health Act 3 on the 20th of July 2004. It was the worst day of my life, and the beginning of the end of his. Leaving him at the hospital that first night was horrendous. I will never forget the look of hatred and disappointment in his eyes as he watched me leave. He never looked at me the same way again. He would try to pretend that he was fine with me, but I could see the anger and resentment simmering away under the surface of his smiling face. Within 5 months as an inpatient under the care of the Trust, Dad was dead. On the 4th of December 2004, my dad hung himself with his shoelaces in the bathroom at the Lakes Hospital while under Section 3 of the Mental Health Act. I went into physical shock for about a month. I had to be prescribed sedatives just to calm me down, and I had to take a month off of work. If it wasn't for the love, support and patience of David, Tony and a handful of dear friends, I do not think that I would be here today. I wanted to die with him. I felt like when he died, that so should I. I wanted time to stop. The world should have ended the moment that Fred Peck died. I couldn't get my head around the fact that life continued without him. I was emotionally beaten. The person that I had modelled myself on had killed himself because I had made the decision to section him. To add to this, as a consequence of the lackadaisical and disrespectful manner in which I was treated by the Trust, I found myself utterly defeated and bereft. At the time, I was a highly qualified and experienced business analyst and IT programme manager with a great career ahead of me. I gave it all up because I had lost all confidence in myself. The self-assured, career-driven, sociable young lady that I had been sadly died alongside her father. David and I had a small wedding with just 8 people attending. I couldn't face having a big wedding without Dad there. I had to walk myself down the aisle. There was no father of the bride's speech or father-daughter dance. He couldn't tell me how proud he was of me or how beautiful I looked in my wedding dress. Our son was born 3 years nearly to the day after my dad's passing. My first words upon holding my newborn son for the first time were, "Do you think that Dad is watching?" Our daughter was born just over a year later, and oh my goodness, she's so much like him in character. Gentle, kind, and considerate at all times. Every milestone, every joyful moment, every struggle, every birthday and Christmas is gut-wrenching because Dad should be here. He missed watching his eldest granddaughter grow up into the beautiful young lady that she has become. He also missed out on meeting and getting to know the 4 more gorgeous grandchildren that came after his passing. My whole identity was based around what my dad had taught me. He had shown me the person that I wanted to be, which was him. I respected and idolised him above everyone. My entire sense of self dissolved the day that my dad took his own life. If my dad can still hear me, I want to say that I'm sorry. I am so sorry for letting you down. I'm sorry for placing my faith in the Trust to treat you with the dignity and respect that you deserved. I'm sorry for trusting them to actually do something that could help you in your recovery. I would have cared for you myself and tried to get you better had I known the truth and the tragic outcome. The worst that could have happened is that you had killed you. The worst that could have happened is that you had killed yourself at home, where you belonged and felt safe, and with a glass of wine in your hand.
Could we have the photos, please?
The rain high. In the land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow skies, a blue the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me. Where troubles melt like lemon drops, oh, way above the chimney tops, that's where
Can I thank you very much for sharing both your evidence and also the commemorative memories as well. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. I understand that we are going to pause now for lunch for an hour and then come back after that for our next witness.
So we'll say 1:30.
Yes, please.
Lovely. Thank you very much.